I apologize for the delay. We had some other work and meetings, so just bear with us for another minute or two. We're waiting for another member of the committee. Okay, good afternoon. This is Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee and our afternoon hearings for Thursday, March 25th. We have 11 bills, I believe. In each case, we will start with the sponsor of the bill, followed by their proponents. Then we will take questions from the committee, and we will move to the opponents if there are any. I will share if there are no opponents or there's no opposition to the bill. In which case you may want to tailor your comments and be even more concise than you expect to be. The first witness can go up to 5 minutes, but we would like to encourage them to do a short amount of time. Subsequent can use up to 2.5 minutes. And again, there we would like it to be as clear as possible. We also, if possible, encourage you to talk to us, share your thoughts with us, rather than read your testimony. However, if you need to read your testimony to stay on message or on point, we understand that as well. This afternoon, we're going to start with Delegate Guyton. She has 2 bills before the committee, HB 247 and HB 392. On the first bill, we will have Delegate Guyton. She'll be followed by Joanne Antoine, Andy Kulp, Tammy Bresnahan, and Christy Demnowitz. As I look at the testimony list, I see no opposition, so please keep that in mind. Delegate Guyton, welcome to EHE.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the Environment, Health, and Education Affairs Committee. I will keep that in mind, and I will cut my testimony in half out of respect for your time. So I am here for the record, Delegate Michelle Guyton from District 42B in Baltimore County, and I thank you for your consideration of House Bill 247. And this is as amended by the Ways and Means Committee. This legislation requires that in consultation with local boards, the State Board of Elections will develop training materials and the various methods that an election judge may use to accommodate voters in need of assistance at a polling site. So those groups include those who are elderly or disabled and have a mobility problem, those who are assisting an individual with a mobility problem, or those who are accompanied by a child with a disability. This legislation is intended to encourage those who would be unable to comfortably wait in lines to participate fully in the political process. HB 247 also requires that polling places post visible notices that special assistance is available if requested, and that election judges allow voters for whom it may be difficult or painful to wait in line to request voting priority based on those guidelines that are developed by the Board of Elections. So with that, because there is no opposition, I just want to thank, I see Mr. Demarinis here as well. We worked out a lot of our kinks for this bill last year with his assistance. And so I'd like to ask for a favorable report from this committee on House Bill 247. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. Move to Ms. Antoine, followed by Andy Kulp, followed by Tammy Bresnahan, followed by Christy Demnowitz.
So Senator Pinsky, I don't see where Ms. Antoine is present, and I don't see Ms. Demnowitz as well.
Okay, is Andy Kulp with us?
Yes.
Then let's go to Andy Kulp of the ARC, followed by Tammy Bresnahan.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm Andy Kulp and I'm testifying on behalf of the ARC Maryland. It's often difficult for people with mobility disabilities and parents of young children with disabilities to exercise their right to vote. And in this last election, that difficulty was lessened through the opportunity for voting by absentee ballot. However, we can always do better as a state to show our commitment to voting access for all by passing bills such as this one that would create conditions that encourage older adults and voters with mobility disabilities to come out and vote. We like the provisions of the bill to create some training and post notices for voters with disabilities so they know they can access this voter order priority. And we believe that this bill is moving us one step toward ensuring greater access to the right to vote for people with disabilities. So for these reasons, we urge the committee's favorable report, and thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you, Ms. Kulp. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Bresnahan, are you with us?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Education, Health, and Environment Committee. I'm Tammy Bresnahan. I'm the Advocacy Director for AARP Maryland. And I just want to say very quickly that ARP believes that voting rights should address the needs of people with mental and physical disabilities. Increasing numbers of Americans have disabilities, and our population is aging. Laws must protect vulnerable populations' access to the polls. And we thank Delegate Guyton for bringing this bill forward. I think she brought it forward last year, but we just ran out of time. I would also like to thank the Maryland Board of Elections. They worked with us last year during the primary and during the general election. We did teletown halls with Nikki Carlson, Linda Lamone. I can't tell you how much access we had to them. We would have at least 10 to 20,000 people on the call at any given moment to try and figure out how they were going to access the polls or get their ballot. So this is a joint effort, and we love partnering with the legislature and the Maryland Board of Elections, and we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Hello, Delegate Guyton. I have a quick question for you. I wonder if the committee, I'm looking at the amended version of the bill. There are no page numbers. Wait, page 1, 2, 3. I think it's on page 3 of 4. It describes the signs. Minimum 24 inches by 36 inches and posted prominently at the entrance of each polling site. Did the committee or the body discuss at all the concept of languages that reflect the linguistic skills of that voting location?
Thank you so much for that question, Senator Kagan. I do not believe that we actually did that, but I think it's a fabulous suggestion.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I will discuss that with colleagues. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions on this legislation? Again, there is no opposition, seeing none and no questions. That completes the hearing on 247. And thank you for your patience, Ms. Bresnahan, Ms. Kulp. Thank you for joining us. Moving on to number 2, HB 392, family child care homes, large family child care homes and child care centers. We'll hear from Delegate Guyton, followed by Rebecca Landa, Tracy Merriman, Andy Kopp again, and then we'll hear from favorable amendments, Christina Push. And then there is a opposition, but it was written only. So Delegate Guyton, tell us about your bill.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Pinsky, again, and members. For your consideration of House Bill 392, again, as amended by the Ways and Means Committee. And the amendments that we have included in the version of the bill that you have in front of you, I feel actually address the concerns that have been raised by the child care advocates and providers that we've discussed, we've talked with quite often over the past 2 years about this bill. I recognize that they still seem to have some misunderstanding about what's mandated in the bill and what needs extra funding, but I truly believe that that's been addressed in this bill. So this bill requires that child care centers and family child care homes licensed by the Maryland State Department of Education Office of Child Care either, and this is the important difference, offer or assist families in finding a developmental screening that's approved by the Maryland State Department of Education, and that they offer this or help all families of children under 3 years of age. So the purpose of this legislation is to ensure that children with developmental delays are identified and that they received appropriate intervention as early as possible in order to achieve the best outcomes and ensure kindergarten readiness. I'm sure this committee is well aware that 90% of a child's brain is developed actually before the age of 5 or 6. And so by the time we are getting them into our public school system, they're already way behind if they need those early intervention services. The child care providers under this bill will also be required to just provide information on the Maryland Infant and Toddlers Program to families and to assist families who request help contacting that agency because they have concerns about their child's development to do so. So, you know, I won't give you the whole spiel about how data show that the earlier a child with developmental disabilities is identified, the more likely that they will no longer need special education services later in school. And we all know that an investment in early identification and intervention for these kids is the best money that we can spend in Maryland. However, I will say that there is no significant fiscal note associated with this bill. So for all of those reasons, I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 396.
And thank you, Delegate Guyton. Let's go to Rebecca Landa, if you're with us.
I'm here. Yes, thank you.
Great.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky and Vice Chair Kagan and members of the committee. I'm Dr. Rebecca Landa. I'm the director of the Center for Autism and Related Disorders at Kennedy Krieger Institute. And I have submitted written testimony, and I'm here to urge a favorable vote on House Bill 392. The reason for that is just as Delegate Guyton said, this is a power-packed, evidence-based need. We know from the neurosciences, quite simply, that the brain development is an interaction between a child's neurobiology and their experiences. That's why we have in the neurosciences the term experience-dependent neuroplasticity. This is a known phenomenon. And so for typically developing children, experiences are important, but for children who have a developmental delay or developmental disorders, there are certain kinds of experiences that must be put in place for the brain to be able to wire itself to enable that child to achieve their full potential. We know how to do that. There's an evidence base for that, but children have to be identified. And so the problem is that if you look at the data for how many children are enrolled in Part C or 0 to 3 intervention, and then you look at the number of children who are involved in special education in elementary school, the numbers jump dramatically. That means we're missing a lot of children. We're missing a vital period of neurodevelopment when children could be getting the enriched experiences that they need. And so the problem that we have, as Delegate Guyton already said, is that when children miss this window, the deleterious effect, the data are clear from longitudinal studies, it lasts a lifetime. Children who miss early intervention are the kids who end up with employment problems, problems with the law, they have more social emotional problems, we have fewer graduates from high school. So this is a societal issue that really has the potential, it's a malleable problem. I mean, we can really address it. So that's why, you know, we have to take a public health approach to screening. We have to really increase the public's knowledge of the importance. We need all hands on deck. Child care providers are going to be a really important partner in this process and helping to educate parents in this regard. And so I feel the evidence is clear that early screening promotes early detection, promotes early access to intervention, which it means better outcomes for children, families, and society. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Landa. Tracy Merriman, please.
Hi, thank you, chairs and members of the committee. My name is Tracy Merriman Jost. I'm owner of Kids Campus Early Learning Center located in Calvert County, Maryland. We're licensed to serve 150 students aged 6 weeks through 12 years of age. About 11% of our student population either have a special or medical need or are receiving early intervention services. You already heard from Delegate Guyton and Dr. Landa about the importance of early intervention, and I'm sure you're aware of that. So I'll move my testimony along. From 2014 to 2017, I was hired by Maryland State Department of Education to oversee a developmental screening project as part of the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant. We were provided $2.5 million to try to initiate a regulation to require child care providers to conduct developmental screening on children ages birth through age 5 prior to kindergarten entry. Through that process, we created a training for providers to understand what developmental screening is and how it differs from evaluation, how to communicate those results to parents and share the results and make a referral with parent consent. We provided a year's worth of free training to child care providers, and that training right now costs approximately $45 for online training. It's also available in a face-to-face format through the Maryland Approved Trainer Network. Through the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Fund, we were also able to provide child care providers with free developmental screening tools. So we provided approximately 4,700 developmental screening tools to child care providers across the state. The most widely selected tool was called Ages and Stages, and that had about 4,000 orders. Let's see, we also provided a training of trainer series to the Maryland Approved Training Network on tool-specific training. So that's more than just how to have an overview of developmental screening. It's actually more about how you use the tool and actually conduct the screening using a specific tool. Those trainings are still available through Maryland's Approved Training Network, and the costs vary depending on who the trainer is. I am in support of this bill. The only amendment I would like to see is if providers are required to conduct the actual developmental screening, those providers that didn't have access to the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant, it would be nice if they could get funding to access those tools in that training. Child care providers have been really significantly hit through the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had substantial financial losses. We've been told emergency funding that was supposed to happen in April is further delayed. So I understand from Delegate Guyton's bill that she said we can also just help parents locate the developmental screening. So in some instances, Ages and Stages can be conducted by a pediatrician. It can also be conducted by the parent themselves. So if that's an option, I think that would be also a good way to go and to use the tool as the tool is intended to be used. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Merriman Jost. Ms. Kulp.
Yes, hi, good afternoon again, Chairman Pinsky, Madam Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Andy Kulp, and I'm here on behalf of the ARC Maryland in our work to advance the inclusion, rights, and opportunities of people with developmental disabilities. So I won't repeat, but I do support the contents of the previous testimonies from this panel. I would just add that the benefits of early identification of disabilities and delays and early intervention are clear. According to Maryland's 2018 longitudinal data, more than 2/3 of children who received early intervention were able to return to general education by the 3rd grade. While more than 19,000 children in Maryland receive early intervention services, many have not yet been identified. And we believe that this bill will go a long way to accomplish the timely ID of children in need of early intervention and assistance. So we want to thank the sponsor for her submission of this bill, and we urge a favorable report from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Christina Push, and then we'll take questions for favorable and favorable with amendments.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Pinsky and committee. So I'm Christina Push, Executive Director of the Maryland State Child Care Association, and I want to go testify on the record that I fully support early interventions and developmental screenings. And I echo what the panel has said with regard to the benefits and the importance that developmental screenings and early interventions has in the life of a child and family. I'm confused, and maybe Delegate Guyton can explain, but the way the bill reads, and I'm not the only one confused, there's other testimony regarding this, is that it sounds like that the choice is that you are supposed to give the family the information that's developed by the department, and then, or some type of information about screenings, it's not clear. And then the family then has the option to have you do it as a provider, or there they can say, we don't do it, but here's where you can get it. That's not how it reads, because there are clauses in here for civil immunity, willful negligence, which if this is a professional, that's doing it, there shouldn't have to be clauses for that. And what happens if the trust is broken and that family leaves because of an, improperly conducted screening? Also, the screenings, I don't believe, are in all languages. I know Senator Kagan brought that up in the previous bill. I am concerned, as Tracy said, COVID has wreaked havoc and has on small business. And we also have a huge critical workforce shortage nationally and in this state. So just having the same staff members being trained and using tool-specific training, these are certainly important as well. So I think we need to come up with a little bit a better understanding of how this bill is to work. And we support all of her, the sponsors' efforts and the committee, but we need to, I think, have more clarification and a better organized fashion. This isn't an optimum time to put this into play, especially during the pandemic. So,
thank you. Let's start with Senator Carosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Guyton, for this bill. And I think we're all in agreement on the intention. As you may have been on our Women's Caucus meeting this past Wednesday, and we had Ms. Push, who gave us an update on some of the challenges of our child care providers at this time, and she echoed some of the issues we discussed on Wednesday. So my first question, and I didn't know when I first formed my question that Ms. Push would be testifying, but she actually had offered amendments, but now obviously has additional questions. So I echo those concerns. And my question would be, I'm very concerned about the very small family childcare providers, the ones that, it might be a 1 or 2 person operation, and they're barely making it through COVID right now. So I don't know what, I don't have an amendment to offer. I haven't gone through line by line, but I certainly would want to confer with Ms. Push on any type of amendment that might address those really, those small providers that, especially in the rural areas, that are barely making it at this point, and I guess anywhere across the state. So, maybe you've already thought about how your bill addresses that, or could address those providers.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for asking that question. Certainly, actually, as initially written in the last year's version, this bill only applied to child care centers. However, there was an outcry from many of them, and also the need for other child care providers to be included in this bill. So actually, the family child care providers came to me and asked that they be included in general. I'm a little confused about Ms. Push's testimony, because I feel like we really did work through all the amendments that they presented to us and got them all in the bill. So I'm apologize respectfully if she's confused about what the bill says regarding that and how family child care centers are affected by this. But honestly, there should be no onerous task or financial responsibility to this. We're really just asking for them, if they're unable, the small ones that you're mentioning, Senator, if they're unable to be trained to do or don't want to be trained to do the screening themselves, that they just provide information in the form of a pamphlet. I think it's in the bill, an email, a letter directly to the parents of how they can have that done. And I don't really think that's going to put our child care centers under this year. I mean, that's
what
my
about
opinion.
what about the civil immunity issues that scare every small business? And I really hard, as soon as I heard that, alarm bells went off.
Absolutely. And that, again, that was at the request of the child care centers that we put something in the bill to protect them if there were any problems with screening, that they would be covered and protected. That was certainly not, and I don't feel that it's necessary in this bill, but I added it at their request.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to speak.
Very, very briefly.
Okay, so if you could be clear, it sounds like that who will be promoting a brochure or a form that we can share that has professional information about the importance of developmental screenings and where they can find them. If the program, and many do these screenings, many programs that are comfortable doing it, that have been trained, do it, and they do it successfully. So I'm not against it at all. But where does it say and who will do
Okay,
it?
I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah, I don't understand.
We're going to hold on cross conversation. You can have an offline conversation.
Okay, because we
Thank
can't
you.
figure it out.
Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Guyton, for this bill. I was listening, and I think Dr. Landa, she mentioned something. If I got the name right.
You did.
She mentioned something about, thank you, sir, malleable problem, and I'm not familiar with that term and in the context you use it. So could you go over that again, what it means to a lay person like me?
I'm sorry, it's a fixable problem. Sorry.
Okay, and in terms of, you said that in terms of what problem?
In terms of if we do screening and we make it universal and families have access to it, then we should be able to really change the landscape of early detection and access to early intervention and improve children's outcome.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question, and I'm not sure whether it's to Delegate Guyton or Dr. Landa. I guess my question is about the quality of the training and whether it needs a professional or some hours of training, whether it be online or in person, is going to give people truly the skills to catch someone who is starting to show symptoms of autism or these other conditions. And you would hate to say someone has been screened and then it shows up 6 months, a year later when they take it to their private provider or medical or specialist child. So talk to me about the quality and level of screening if we leave it just to the facilities.
Thank you, Senator. I actually will defer to Dr. Landa on that because she develops these screenings, and I appreciate the question very much. So I'll defer to her.
Thank you.
Dr. Landa?
Thank you. The screeners that Ms. Jost mentioned, the 8 stages questionnaire, is an evidence-based screener. These are not evaluations. They're just a screener. So they can miss kids and they can over-identify kids. So what the childcare community would be doing through this bill is to give an evidence-based, normed, standardized screener that's sold through Brooks Publishing. And it is a very low-cost screener because you're allowed to make copies on your own without having to pay for the extra copies. But the point is that these are administered according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. Children are screened at regular intervals. So it's not a once and done thing. There's a net because development is dynamic and kids can change from one screening to the next. So if they pass here, they might fail the next one. The point is that the child care providers are not giving a diagnosis. They're telling the family that the child passed based on the parent's report or in a gray zone or a screening failure. And then the parents then have to take the next step. And I think that's what Delegate Guyton's also saying, is that the child care providers can then point the parents in the right direction. Talk to your pediatrician, look into infants and toddlers. So those are the steps. And I did actually take the training that MSDE and under Tracy's direction developed. It's really quite clear. And there are supports in place. In fact, I volunteer. If anybody needs some extra support with these screenings, I'm happy to provide some extra support.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions and no oral opposition, that concludes the hearing. Thank all of you for your patience and testimony. Thank you for visiting us, Dr. Guyton, Delegate Guyton. Okay, we're going to move to HB 335, Delegate Boyce. This is what, twice in 2 days or twice in 3 days?
I know. You love seeing me.
Well, as long as you keep bringing us good bills.
Oh, amen. I will promise to do so.
Okay, this is election law, party and elected public officials. Delegate Boyce.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon to, of course, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair, and the Committee of the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs for the Rebecca and Regina T. Boyce Here to testify on HB 335, Election Law, Party and Public Offices Prohibition. This bill prohibits elected officials from also holding or registering for an elected office as a party official, or what we call the State Central Committee. Historically, the organizing of parties began in 1824 and was codified in law in 1886. It stated that when a primary election developed at the end of the 19th century, state central committees formed to oversee their conduct. The role of the State Central Committee, or grassroots elected volunteers, is to build the party organization at each district level. This, of course, is done in many ways: getting out the vote by registering residents to vote, organizing and encouraging voter turnout during the primary and general elections, fundraising for the party, and facilitates the vacancy process to provide nominations to the governor should a senator or, of course, a delegate resign their position. For decades, the practice of holding both elected offices has been questionable. The allowance of both holding both these positions possesses an interesting dynamic that I find, and it's a conflict of interest for the State Central Committee member and their role, as well as the elected official in their role. The allowance assumes automatic next in line policies and politics that distorts the democratic process and the true role of the elected party office. I, as well as many of my constituents, thank you for assisting us with correcting this allowance and ask for a favorable report. I'm done, Mr. Chair.
I had to unmute myself.
I know, so hard these days.
Afraid I would say something bad. Chrissy Demnowitz was not here earlier. I assume you're still not here.
No, she's still not here.
Okay, there is one unfavorable that is written only. You may check that out. Are there questions for the good delegate? Senator Guyton, followed by Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hello, Delegate. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Senator.
I apologize, got on a little late, had a bill in Ways and Means, but heard a little bit about this bill. Interesting little fact, in 2018, I ran for the Central Committee and State Senate at the same time. After winning the Senate seat in the general election, I decided I was not going to be in two positions. So right prior to being sworn in January, I resigned the Central Committee position.
Good.
So my question is, and you may have addressed this earlier, and I apologize.
That's okay.
Would you be open to amending this so it just makes it so folks can't serve in two at the same time, or does it have to be they can't even run for both?
And I thank you for that, and it's a great question. I honestly think they shouldn't be able to run for both either, because they're such different positions. I mean, of course, if you win one, you'll be a part of one and not the other. I would respectfully leave that up to the committee, but so long as the intent of the bill is served, which is essentially that that you cannot serve as a State Central Committee member and also be an elected official. If that intent remains, then I would be satisfied.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Nope, no problem.
Senator Washington.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Boyce.
Hi,
Thank you
Senator.
for bringing this bill. Senator Guyton gave you an opportunity, because my question was that it really the intent is to serving, and thanks for raising this in your testimony, that being both on the ballot as a part, particularly in primaries, I think is problematic, right? Because you're both a member, you have a responsibility to conduct the election, and then you are also on the ballot for a position.
Mhm.
And so thanks for, is that true? I guess to make it a question.
Yes, isn't that so? Yes, that's so.
Yes, yeah. And then I guess the other thing was you are open to that, what Senator Guyton was suggesting, because in that scenario, you're not yet an elected official. You
That's
are running
true.
for both. Okay, great.
That's true.
All
Yes.
righty. Well, again, thank you very much, Delegate.
Thank you, Senator. Good to see my senator for the fighting 43rd. Just had to get a shout out. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Must tell you, Delegate Boyce, you're very, very quick on the isn't that so. That's a frequently used terminology in our committee. So thank you for being aware of that. I'm not sure who I saw first. We're going to go with Senator Lamb, followed by Senator Ellis.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate Boyce, for bringing this to us. I just had a question for you, I guess, regarding the Central Committee. So Central Committee members are leaders of their political parties, which are really, you know, like private organizations.
Sure.
And, you know, are there other examples of situations where you can say that you can't be a member of, you know, this private organization and be a member of the General Assembly?
Delegate, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can give examples, but what I will say is this bill was amended, for instance, to allow, for instance, when we have gubernatorial elections, when we elect delegates to be a part of the kind of the presidential ballot, it would exclude those individuals. But I guess respectfully, I don't see it. I see them as the same. So as an elected official, I see myself essentially privy to the actual party, because the party is going to provide the resources, potentially in some funding to a degree, to help get my name out as the quote unquote Republican or the Democratic nominee, or in some cases the incumbent. And so I as an elected official have that access. So it doesn't seem, why would I then have the access on the ground level to, it just seems like a strange line to then be on the State Central Committee, potentially using that committee. They're already in their capacity to help get out the vote and support whoever those nominees are. It would almost seem that I would control them, and that is not my or anybody's responsibility. I would argue that they would be like almost an independent agency from an elected official. I wouldn't want to feel like my presence somehow influences them to make decisions that otherwise wouldn't be best for the party, but would somehow be best for me, Regina.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the concern. Yeah. I was just thinking about, you know, is there some precedent set that you can't serve in this body, but because you serve or not in a you know, nonprofit entity that's separate from the General Assembly. But you know, I understand the point too, that separate entity, which is a nonprofit organization, you know, is in a private organization, you know, has other special abilities or power, authority, so to speak, you know, as our political parties, right? So there's a little bit of a difference there. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're quite welcome, Senators.
Before I call on Senator Ellis, let me also be clear. It says office. It doesn't say state or county. So this would, pending an amendment, it would, in my reading and our council's reading, means it would affect state and local central committees. So
yes. So in other words, I couldn't, right, because we've had cases where.
Yeah, I'm not speaking for or against. I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, I was going to give an example, Senator. Yes, you're correct.
Okay, Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Boyce, for this bill. This issue affects my district of several members who are, you know, in various positions. Some ran, won both, and came off the Central Committee. So my question was answered by Chairman Pinsky in that last exchange you have. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll return it back to you. And thank you, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Senator Ellis.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, that concludes the hearing. Thank you, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for the consideration, committee.
Absolutely. We're going to go to Delegate Rosenberg, my former co-chair of ALR. Foreign manufacture of election systems, notifications, and termination of contract. There is no one signed up, either orally or written, in opposition. Welcome, Delegate Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just add that you and I, it didn't matter who was the presiding chair on AELR, and we've kept that. I've had, I think, 3 different chairs since you. And since then, it really hasn't mattered who's been the presiding chair. Just a note, a worthy note, hopefully.
And they had a large shoes to fill, a 12, actually. So thank you.
Well done, well done. This bill builds upon existing law, which requires the disclosure of foreign ownership of an election system provider or any material change in ownership. That's legislation we passed 2 years ago. House Bill 392 provides that a contract with a provider of election systems must require, one, disclosure of the manufacturer of any components by a foreign entity, and disclosure would also be required subsequently of any material change to a component of the election system at any stage of the manufacturing process if that were done outside the United States. The state administrator could terminate the contract if there's a finding that a foreign manufacturer had control, influence, or direct manufacture of the system. And this is for an eventuality that we can no longer consider hypothetical and is crucial to maintaining the integrity of our system so that any foreign player could not tinker, is a nice way of putting it, with the systems that are so crucial to our electoral process and to our democracy. I would ask for a favorable report.
Senator Ellis, you have a question?
No, Mr. Chairman, that was from the previous.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there questions for the good delegate? Seeing none and seeing no, I'm sorry, Senator Kagan, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Rosenberg, thanks for this bill. And certainly there have been a lot of questions that have been raised about this. One of the issues, in my opinion, is insufficient transparency when it comes to procurement by SBE. I just want to ask whether you gave any, whether the committee or the body gave any thought to enhancing oversight. And if you haven't, maybe you and I can talk offline about some ideas.
Well, this bill is modeled upon HR 1 and its previous, I forget what number it was when it passed the House of Representatives previously. So we really just built, I don't want to say built upon because that implies we did more than. We really copied what is in that bill and applied it to Maryland law, and would certainly be willing to talk to you about anything further.
Thank you, Delegate Rosenberg. I worry about the lack of oversight and accountability sometimes, and and I think having other sort of cooks in the kitchen on something like this might be useful to make sure that nothing gets overlooked or slipped through. So I will definitely be contacting you on this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I would also point out that we passed a bill through this committee on ownership. If ownership changes to a foreign owner, in some ways it looks like the exact same language, just material goods opposed to management or ownership. So I think it's in keeping with other actions the committee's taken.
That is correct. Thank you.
No, thank you. Seeing no further questions, that concludes the hearing on 369. I think that's the only one today, Delegate Rosenberg.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Delegate Wilson, 373, child abuse and sexual misconduct prevention, hiring emergent employees. The delegate will be followed by John, excuse me, John Willems and Vanessa Bass. Oh, yeah. Delegate Wilson, welcome to EHE.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues. I will try to be brief and not belabor you with points unless you have further questions. Basically, in 2019, we put forth a bill, House Bill 486, which is called the Sesame Bill, the School Employees Sexual Abuse, Misconduct, and Exploitation Bill, passed unanimously in both houses. What the bill did was it required a proper vetting for not just criminal, but also personnel files for all the individuals that interact with our children in our public and our private schools. However, after meeting with some of the school officials throughout the state it was drawn to my attention that has been a difficulty in hiring. As such, what we did is this bill, what it basically does is allows us to set aside what we call provisional hiring. We created something called an emergency employee, which is basically an employee that they can extend the contract for 60 days, bring under their employment while they were doing this background search that was required by the Sesame bill. All this does is open this up, allow these individuals to be hired, again, provisionally, no guarantee, and then this offer can be rescinded if they find out that they have been misled or that there is something on the record of this individual that they do not wish to have. That is the crux of this bill, and that's what we're asking for. So I'd ask a favorable report for House Bill 373.
Thank you, Delegate Wilson. Let's go to Mr. Willems.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. MABE is testifying in strong support of House Bill 373. We appreciate Delegate Wilson's support for this legislation in each of the last two sessions, and unfortunately it didn't make it across in time for your committee's consideration last year. We also thank this committee for its support for passing the original legislation, House Bill 486, in 2019. That legislation in 2019 was based largely on pre-existing Pennsylvania law. And we discovered essentially immediately after the fact, as we began to implement the new law, that there was a provision in the Pennsylvania law we wish we had included in the Maryland law. And that is the emergent employee provision that allows us, pending the completion of the employer history review, to place a teacher, an employee, for a very limited period of time with supervision in their employment position. And in the rare and hopefully non-existent, but that's not in fact the case, we do in fact learn troubling things from these employer history reviews. We pull that person, and that person is no longer an employee of the school system, and we are not essentially on the hook for the year's salary for that employee under any circumstance. And so that's essentially what this bill does. It allows us to address the problem of having to hire a highly qualified employee and put them in what is inartfully called 486 jail, which is a holding pattern for an otherwise highly qualified employee pending the completion of that employer history review. And so my testimony includes much more additional background on the pre-existing background check laws. There's always the question, is this in any way kind of weakening the foundational supports of background checks? And that is not in fact the case. The background check provisions are in other sections of statute, and they are held completely harmless by this legislation. And so all of that remains intact. This is just essentially an administrative amendment to what we believe is the very important and largely successful House Bill 486 passed in 2019. For those reasons, urge a favorable report on House Bill 373. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willems. Vanessa Bass from Queen Anne's County.
Yes, good afternoon. Members of the Senate Education, Health, Environmental Affairs Committee. I'm here to put forth testimony for House Bill 373. It allows local school board education or non-public school to hire an applicant as an emergent employee for up to 60 days pending a specified review of information records regarding an individual's employment history. The bill also changes provisions specifying the employment history that schools are required to obtain before hiring an individual who have direct contact with minors, and alters the definition of direct contact of minors. Lastly, the bill also allows local school boards to share an employment history record with other local school boards. PZAM strongly supports House Bill 373 and appreciates the sponsor's willingness to work with local school boards, education, and superintendents to address some of the challenges we have encountered during the implementation of 2019 House Bill 486. That legislation added an additional background check for school system applicants, requiring the districts to contact all applicants' previous employers and to ensure that no history of child abuse. The year's legislation will help us more fully and efficiently achieve the goal, and hire the necessary staff for all our school systems in a timely manner. The bill will allow us to hire an applicant as an emergent employee for up to 60 days while we finalize the extensive background check. Based on our discussions with all the local school agency LEAs, we estimated that it took 2 to 3 weeks or longer to contact a former employer. The 2019 legislation went into effect July 1st, 2019, and was applicable to 2019-20 school year. So the review of those applicants were crucial as we worked to fill important positions before the start of school in September. Several districts had to start that year with substitutes and speculate that they may have lost applicants due to the long process. However, we believe this bill's proposal of an emergent employee will alleviate those concerns and still provide safeguards intended in the original legislation.
Great. Ms. Bass, there's no opposition. I think we've gotten the position of Queen Anne, and we appreciate your testimony. We really do.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I see a question from Senator Ellis, either for Delegate Wilson, Mr. Williams, or Ms. Bass. Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Wilson, for this bill. I have a question. So in the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago, there was a series of terrible outbreaks of abuse in Prince George's County and Charles County, our home county. And so what kind of damage could, if, say, someone like one of those gentlemen, in Prince George's Charles, are in the schools for that period of time before their full background is done? Is it possible they can do tremendous damage in that, what, I think 60 days? And what would prevent that from happening? And, you know, why wouldn't the system be able to go back and start earlier in the employment process to make sure that when these people get into school, they're fully vetted?
Well, thank you, Senator. To answer your first question, or your last question first, is that these individuals are sought after, many especially are African-American males. And so by the time we in Maryland get done with our search, they're working in Pennsylvania or Virginia. So as far as timeliness, it's very difficult to vet them in that timely manner. Secondly, if you read the bill, it makes very specific that any of these individuals can only work with other children in the vicinity of a permanent employee or subject in consistently audio or videotape, which is always promptly reviewed by school administrators. So we threw that in there for that oversight and accountability, because trying to find that balance is very difficult. So therefore we paired them up with somebody who is vetted, and we required them to be videotaped. We believe that that was a very sufficient method in preventing these individuals, like you just mentioned, from having any negative impact on our children.
You're very smart. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Further questions for the sponsor or the witnesses? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing. Thank you, Delegate Wilson, for joining us. Ms. Bass, Mr. Williams, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
We're going to move on to HB 448, Legal and Employee Holiday, Juneteenth National Freedom Day. We have Delegate Harrison from Prince George's County. Welcome to EHE, Delegate.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. For the record, I am Andrea Fletcher Harrison, and I'm here to present HB 448, an act concerning state government, legal and employee holiday, Juneteenth National Freedom Day, and I'm respectfully requesting a favorable report in this bill. I don't think that I need to necessarily go into what Juneteenth is. I think that most of you probably know by now. I will say that all but 4 states in the country recognize the emancipation of slavery here. And 4 of those states have it as a paid state holiday. Maryland is one of the states that recognizes it as a commemorative day, but to date, there's been very little done to truly appreciate the blood, sweat, and tears of those Blacks who built this state by way of their servitude. And so while there have been celebrations around the country, they've not always been welcomed. And I just believe that it's time for us to celebrate this as a paid holiday, whether or not you identify as Black. Just because we abolished slavery doesn't mean that the work of systemic racism has ended. And Juneteenth should serve as a reminder that it's up to all of us to be part of the solution. We saw these tragic deaths over this last year, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, just to name a few. And these tragedies actually have forced people around the world to open their eyes to the plight of Black people in this country. I believe that it's important to recognize Black Americans have been fighting for justice since this country's inception, and the struggles of systemic racism that Black people have talked about consistency, the overt and covert displays of racism and the suffering that, quite frankly, many have silently suffered. And this affected our nation, and it continues to this day. I think that it is important to recognize, celebrate, observe, and realize that we have not fully addressed our past in the ways that it needs to be done. I could go on and on, but I think that we should recognize that the plight of Black people in Maryland, and appreciate our past and our continued contributions to this great state. And with that being said, I'm not going to go on anymore, but I certainly thank you for your time, and again, respectfully request a favorable report on HB 448, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Let's go to Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate, for this bill. And my question, I understand the issue with Juneteenth, and I guess the move is to make it more a national day of emancipation recognized by so many states. Juneteenth being the date when the last slaves were freed in Texas. I know in Washington, D.C., they have an actual paid holiday for their Emancipation Day, which I believe is like April 16th. Now, in Maryland, our emancipation in Maryland happened November 1st, 1864. And so how all these different dates are flowing around. So what is your principle behind us celebrating Juneteenth as the actual Emancipation Day in Maryland?
Sure. I think that Juneteenth, June 19th, is a more widely recognized day. While we do have all of these other days, I believe that we should go with that which was, I would say, more formally recognized. And that would be June 19th, which was, another 2 years, I guess, after the actual Emancipation Proclamation was signed. I just think that, I think it's about consistency. And I think that this leads to consistency, June 19th.
Good, thank you.
In committee, as we know, there is a second bill that does recognize Maryland's Emancipation Day, and we can take up that issue in committee. I think they're both valid, and obviously we shouldn't be limited to one holiday in terms of justice. So we will continue this conversation. Seeing no further questions, no further witnesses, Delegate Harrison, good to see you in EHE.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay. We're going to move to HB 630, Delegate Solomon, Primary and Secondary Education School District Energy Use Policy and Study. Delegate Solomon will be followed by Joanna Pysonier, Elizabeth Feldman, and Oliver Song. The only opposition is written, not oral, and that comes from Anne Arundel County Public Schools. So with that, welcome back to EHE, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, good members of the committee. It's good to see you again. Thank you for the opportunity to present on HB 630, the School Clean Energy Act. For the record, again, Delegate Jared Solomon. Before I get into the testimony on the bill, I just wanted to start off really by thanking the committee for your incredible work on the Climate Solutions Now Act. You all did such amazing work, frankly, on advancing green schools and making our schools both more energy efficient and friendlier, safer environments for our students. I wanted to just acknowledge that, and I'm really hopeful that the House will follow your strong lead and hopefully pass that bill. And so, this bill, I think, is a very small part in really accomplishing the same goals that your committee had set out. And you're going to hear from some of the advocates that we've been working with, but it really came out of a group that we met with back in the winter of 2019, who had been working on trying to improve access to information and really work with our local board in Montgomery County around energy efficiency and energy usage for our schools. And what they discovered was the information on really what even school districts use for their energy, what their energy policies are often completely buried or non-existent. And you'll hear from Liz Feldman that many school districts have not actually updated their energy policy, at least publicly, for, in some instances, 30 years. And so what our bill does is try to fix that. It doesn't really put any requirements on a school system other than the schools need to have an energy policy. That energy policy needs to be publicly posted, and it should look at certain types of things and publicly report certain types of data, specifically around the amount of renewable energy and the sources that are used, the percentage of renewable energy, and what that is of the total school usage, and then overall usage of energy by source, square foot, and individual school. We've worked with MABE, and this is all information that mostly school districts have already. It's just a matter of putting it into a unified template that the IAC and Department of the Environment will work to put together, and then that will be publicly available. We obviously recommend that school systems should be looking at ways in which they make their energy usage more efficient and more renewable, but we don't put any standards in place or requirements that a certain percentage has to be used. This really is about transparency and reporting. And one of the advocates we worked with really, I think, said it best, that we manage what we measure. And so this is just making sure that school systems have again, a template that is transparent for the public and advocates to be able to see. The last piece that I just want to touch on is there's actually no fiscal note with this bill. So the IAC and MDE already say they can design the template with existing resources. Again, in our conversations with school folks, this is mostly information that schools have already. It's just a matter of assembling it into the template and making it available. I did want to address the opposition testimony from Anne Arundel County Public Schools. To be honest with you, I don't know exactly what they're referring to. Again, our bill does not require, I think their testimony says that we would require, huge amounts of money be shifted in a radical change of energy policy. That's not the case at all. We're just, again, asking for there to be a policy where we're saying sort of what best practices should be, but we're not requiring them to do anything. This is, again, about transparency. So I'm not sure where their opposition comes from. And the last piece of the bill, I don't know how useful it is anymore, assuming we're able to pass the Climate Solutions Now Act, was around, a report to sort of look at innovative financing for an increased number of net zero schools. Obviously, you all accomplished that with the Net Zero Loan Fund. So, again, it would just be an idea of getting some of the smartest folks in the state government together to think about creative ways to increase the number of net zero schools. But that's the purpose of that provision. So thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity. And I hope you can report the bill out favorably.
Thank you, Delegate. If you hold for a moment, Vice Chair, let me get through a few more favorables. Joanna Pai Sunya from Baltimore City Public Schools.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Joanna P. Sunier. I'm with Baltimore City Public Schools, and we support HB 630. I'd like to thank Delegate Solomon and the Appropriations Committee for incorporating the small amendments that we had asked for, and thank you, Chair Pinsky and the Senate Committee for hearing the bill today. Each school district in Maryland should have an energy policy to reduce costs and protect the environment. For many districts, utilities are the second largest budget item after salaries, and the greenhouse gases released as a result of a district's energy use are significant. A district level policy will describe expectations, set goals, and measure progress. Procuring more energy from renewable sources is beneficial to the environment, reduces dependency on the grid, and supports the renewable energy sector in Maryland. City schools procure some of our electricity from an off-site solar farm, has 2 net zero energy schools with on-site solar, and follows all state mandates regarding renewable energy. We adopted a sustainability policy in 2016, which includes an administrative regulation about energy, water, and resource conservation. Schools across the state are of varying ages with many different building systems. Some schools are highly energy efficient, while others are less so. Tracking energy use helps districts to identify inefficient buildings and then reduce waste by changing behaviors and/or directing retrofits to the buildings that most need them. And energy policy also gives districts the opportunity to educate students and staff, because though a building may be designed and constructed to be energy efficient, it may not be operated in an efficient manner. Students can learn about renewable energy, the implications of burning fossil fuels, and ways to use less energy at a school and at home. They'll then understand their relationship to the local, regional, and global ecosystems and the positive steps they can take. Finally, city schools support Section 2 regarding research into funding additional net zero energy schools. For the foregoing reasons, Baltimore City Public School System supports House Bill 630 and urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from Elizabeth Feldman, Glen Echo Heights.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to testify. I'm Liz Feldman. I'm a resident of Montgomery County. And through this group, Glen Echo Heights Mobilization, we have been working to support Montgomery County in trying to achieve the goals of its climate action plan, which call for an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2027 and 100% by 2035. And to do so, we've focused our attention on Montgomery County public schools, the highest contributor, a public contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in the county. With over 208 school properties, they spend over $35 million in electricity alone. They do have an existing energy policy which dates back from the 1970s, and there's also an environmental sustainability management plan that they've developed. But none of these contains tangible goals or benchmarks. And without these, Montgomery County will not be able to meet the goals of its climate action plan. So in looking into this, we did an inventory of school district energy policies across the state, and we learned a few things. One is that school districts are typically the largest energy consumers in counties across Maryland. Most, but not all, school districts have energy policies, but these are often outdated, and with one exception, that's the Baltimore City Schools, none have tangible targets or measurable targets. In counties like Montgomery County, where the county government has adopted targets for renewable energy and greenhouse gas emission reductions, the school districts are exempt from such targets. School districts are not generally monitoring energy use or efficiency in a systematic way, and to date, there is no standardized template for monitoring and reporting schools across school districts. So based on what we've observed in Montgomery County and in school districts statewide, we strongly support the adoption of House Bill 630. It does not impose additional demands on schools or state budgets, and in fact could lead to significant cost savings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Oliver Song, and then we'll go to the vice chair who has a question. Mr. Song.
Hi, my camera is having issue turning on, but hello everyone, my name is Oliver Song and I'm a sophomore at a local high school in Howard County. I'm here today in support of the school energy use policy and study. First, I would like to thank Senator Pinsky and the rest of the committee for allowing me to speak today. America's 17,450 K-12 school districts spend more than $6 billion on energy every year, more than is spent on computers and textbooks combined. Sometimes up to 30% of a district's total energy is used inefficiently and unnecessarily. This excessive use of energy is wasteful and inefficient and horrible for the environment. Thus, it is crucial we begin to transition away from this usage. It has never been more imperative than now to conserve our nation's energy resources. This bill would require that schools address the purchasing, conservation, and efficiency of energy for the school, allowing flexibility in how this will happen and offering a solution to this problem. Evidence is also growing that energy-efficient schools can boost learning environments that lead to improved student performance. Studies have shown that daylighting, which is using daylight for light, may have a positive effect on student attitudes and performance. While correlation does not equal causation, most schools can make the best choice, which is to conserve energy by using natural means. With so much carbon being spewed into the atmosphere, we must take action as the individuals who use energy and curb our energy consumption. However, the real wasters are the schools that spend so much energy every single day. There's actually a middle school near my high school that is completely carbon neutral. It is powered by solar panels and is the first net zero energy school in Maryland. The new and renovated school houses 49% more students and uses 50% less energy. If all Maryland schools could gradually move toward this net zero system with renewed and public energy policies, then the energy usage would decrease significantly, giving both students and staff a better school environment. And for these reasons and more, I, along with other students, urge a favorable report on House Bill 630.
Thank you, Mr. Song. Well done. Vice Chair Kagan has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Solomon, thank you for all the great work that you do. Just wondering if you can explain to us how this bill would dovetail, complement, or conflict with the climate solutions bill that the chairman has sponsored, which also includes a requirement for energy efficient, zero impact schools in each county.
Thank you, Senator Kagan. Good to see you, and I appreciate your Maryland Day flair. Yeah, so I mean, I think the net zero piece obviously, is a priority for your committee, and thinking, beyond just sort of the one school piece, how can we come up with, potentially creative ways to finance even more schools? But I think on the energy efficiency piece, I think it was Joanna who said it correctly that, when you build an energy efficient school, that doesn't mean it's necessarily operated, as efficiently as it needs to be going forward. And so this is really about, making sure that school districts are continually monitoring and looking and thinking, creatively about how they're actually using the energy, where they're purchasing it from. And obviously, that only really, the construction of schools only really impacts new schools. And this is looking at existing buildings as well.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Delegate Solomon. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions and no other witnesses, thank you, Delegate Solomon, and thank you to your witnesses. They do reinforce that we did the right thing in that other bill we've referred to, and we have to keep moving the ball forward for the future of our state, nation, and world. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Concludes the hearing on Delegate Solomon's bill. We're going to move to Delegate Crosby's back with us again. HB 656, early voting centers, bus stops. Welcome back, Delegate Crosby.
Good to see you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, distinguished members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Brian Crosby, and it's an honor to present House Bill 656 entitled Early Voting Centers Bus Stops. This bill is actually modeled after similar legislation that I introduced last session, and we sent it to interim study where I worked with both MACO and the State Board of Elections to ensure its workability at the local level. The purpose of the bill is to just ensure that all Marylanders have the capacity to participate in early voting by requiring any bus route that typically passes within a half a mile of a voting center to adjust that route during early voting so that passengers can embark and disembark as close to the entrance as possible. And the example I'll give is in my county. We have one early voting center, and despite being one of the largest counties in the state by area, it's not easily accessible for transit-dependent voters from our most popular or populated area, which is Lexington Park. So we have a flag stop system, and when riders get on at the bus or on the bus in Lexington Park, then they got to ride for 15, 20 minutes. If there's traffic, it's like 30 to 45 minutes to get to the early voting location. They flag stop and they're actually let off on the side of a highway, which is a huge safety concern. And then they have to walk up a hill, which for somebody like me is not a big deal. But for an elderly person or somebody with a disability, it is a gigantic hurdle, especially when there's inclement weather. And that is about 1,500 feet from the point where they would get dropped off. That's ideal to the front door of the bus stop. And so we're just asking people or asking jurisdictions to slightly adjust the bus routes during the 8 days of early voting. That's it. And I think just or maybe not cute, but a curious little statistic is 3% of people in 2016, and that's the only data I could find, directly attributed their inability to vote due to transportation issues. And so removing this hurdle is just one more way to make democracy a little bit more accessible so that people can exercise their most important constitutional right. And for those reasons, I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. I do have one question and comment. First of all, we're hearing another bill today that increases the number of early voting centers. So hopefully that'll benefit a number of jurisdictions if in fact the committee sees it in its wisdom to pass it. The second question is, how will this play out in a more urbanized area like a Baltimore? I mean, to go a half mile out of the way in an urban area could add another 30 minutes to the trip for the other people who are on the bus. So has there been any thought or consideration of how this will work in a less rural area?
There has, and actually that was my biggest concern with the entire bill and why last year's bill, we had to scrap it and move it to this this system. I don't think it's going to have as big of an impact as you would think, Mr. Chair. You know, in a place like Baltimore City, right, the bus route is never a half mile away from the early voting center, right? It might be like 0.1 miles away and they have to adjust it. So that's kind of where we found that happy medium. And that was where I worked with MACO to make sure that it was workable for the city. Because I recognize that could be a challenge in Montgomery County, in Prince George's County, and in the city.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Crosby, this bill makes a lot of sense to me. I have two quick questions. In the bill on page 2, it says that the rerouting of the buses will happen, quote, during the times the center is open for voting under subsection D of this section. During the time, so if I'm going to be really precise, that means 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. But maybe I've got to go to work and maybe I want to be first in line. So I want to get there by 7, which means I might need to be on the bus at 6:30. Or what if I'm in line and the polls close at 8, but there are still people in line, and so I don't get to vote until 8:20 or something. I'm wondering if you're open to the concept of, and I can work with you or with Mr. Demarinis or something as to, I mean, the intent of your bill, I think, is to make it easier for voters to get to vote and to get to the voting location. I'm just worried about the precise language. That's one question, if you want to answer.
Thank you, Matt. Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's a great point. I am completely open to any amendments to make voting easier, certainly. I just tried to make it as narrow as possible for an easier path to pass, to be honest with you.
Sure.
So you are right, though. I mean, people are going to start to try to line up earlier, and they're going to try to get there. Maybe they don't finish voting until 9 p.m. and then they want to get home. That's another consideration as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, I'm in line and it's 10 of 8. Uh-oh, I'm going to miss my bus. And so I'm going to leave without voting, which is completely counterproductive. So, okay, so we can talk about that. Second, I saw that 32 delegates, I don't know that you can read minds, but what was the key of opposition to this, that 32 delegates voted against this common sense voter access bill?
Madam Vice Chair, I don't have an answer
Okay.
to that.
Right.
I don't even want to speculate.
All right, very interesting. Well, thank you for the bill, Delegate. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Carrozza?
Thank you. I'm reviewing the bill testimony and was following up on some of the concerns that have been raised. And I believe one, I don't know if they're testifying or not. I think they tried to sign up for oral, but may have submitted written. The Transportation Association of Maryland went through their concerns and I guess have offered a couple of amendments, but they're opposed for it for several reasons. Adding additional stops that could require their member agencies to deviate up to 1 mile from the normal route could impose service disruptions and delays. the bill mandates service during hours when certain routes may not be in operation. In addition, I don't know if the delegate, did you consider the federal transit regulations and how your bill would conform with the federal transit regulations? So these were some of the concerns just on the transportation side. And then my understanding is there's also some concerns that have been raised by our local elected election officials. So if you could comment on the concerns that have been raised by the Transportation Association of Maryland, and also the if you did any follow-up work with the federal transit regulations.
So as far as the federal regulations, no, I had not, but we have called back several transportation agencies to get back to them because unaware to me until yesterday that we may be requiring service on routes that don't run during that time, and that's fine. Like I'm not trying to mandate someone or a specific public transportation or bus route is then all of a sudden stood up just for this purpose. We're just trying to simply say, if the route is already in existence and running, they can simply deviate to allow voters the ability to vote. That's all. So I do recognize that there is some opposition testimony. There wasn't any in the House. And so I'm happy to address their concerns and happy to amend the bill so that it's in a format that is more amenable to them.
Well, they have pretty detailed opposition and proposed amendments. So it sounds like it does need work.
Yeah, obviously there's always opposition to a bill. We can assert it needs work, and it may. It's just, that's not anyway. Seeing no further discussion and no further testimony, that concludes the hearing on 656. We're going to move to, do we know who's presenting for the?
So Jared is going to present for this bill, Senator Pinsky. Jared Damaris.
Have they also given you a vote on Ways and Means, Mr. Damaris?
No, they have not. But thank you.
Okay, we're looking at HB 738, Certificates of Candidacy and Ballot Questions Revisions. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Damaris.
Thank you, Chair, and Jared Damaris, Director of Candidacy and Campaign Finance for the Maryland State Board of Elections, for the record. And this is the State Board's legislation, the departmental bill. It's House Bill 738. Happy Maryland Day to all. This legislation is just a calendar correction bill to align certain deadlines with the printing schedule. It really focuses on the gubernatorial candidates when they die, withdraw, or disqualified. It basically requires now that no changes to the ballot occur 70 days prior to the election. And it also changes the deadline for the selection of successor candidates by a central committee to meet those deadlines as well. This basically moves it from 15 days to 69 days prior to the election. So these changes are necessary to avoid any ballot production disruption and possible voter confusion. This was all a result of the election a couple of years ago and the death of the candidate, and then subsequent successor candidates and not having the ability to change the ballot at the time. Additionally, the bill changes the deadline for ballot summary statements for statewide questions by the Department of Legislative Services to be approved by the Attorney General. So it moves it from the fourth Monday in August to the first Monday in August. This gives voters more time because we'll put that up on our website to understand what the questions are. And once again, it helps with the printing schedule here. And it allows, for the complete text for public inspection at the 65th day instead of at least 30 days currently in law. And then finally, the bill authorizes the state board or the local board to provide an individual copy of the complete text of all constitutional questions and amendments electronically rather than by mail or in person. So this gives us the ability to email them as well. With that, I ask for a favorable ruling and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Damaris on the bill? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on that bill.
Thank you.
Is Delegate Lutke with us?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, great. Welcome, Eric. This is 745 early voting centers. Delegate Lutke, welcome to EHE.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Happy Maryland Day. Wonderful to see you all. You know, like everything else over the last year, the pandemic forced us to rethink a lot about our elections. And one of the lessons that at least I learned in interacting with my constituents was that voters like options. They like options. And one of the options that has grown tremendously in popularity in the state, as you know, over the last 10, 15 years is early voting. However, you know, it's been a few years since we revisited the early voting center formulas that determine how many early voting sites exist in a county. So what this bill does is it restructures that formula and tries to rationalize it a little bit. It would say that a county with 50,000 or fewer voters would have one early voting site. A county between 50 and 100,000 registered voters would have two, between 100 and 200, 3, and then essentially for every 100,000 registered voter increase, a county would get 2 additional sites, up to a maximum of 13 for a county that had 600,000 or more voters. The actual impact of that in terms of additional sites in counties is laid out very well by the fiscal note writer. Counties across Maryland in urban areas and rural areas, depending on the number of registered voters they have, would get additional sites starting in the 2022 election. And then as populations grow and numbers of registered voters grow, counties would continue to add sites over the ensuing election cycles. The House Ways and Means Committee also amended the bill to add to it some language specifying certain things that local boards of elections should consider as they are making decisions about the locations of early voting sites. Those include accessibility of the site to historically disenfranchised community, proximity to large concentration of voters, accessibility by public transportation, equitable geographic distribution across a county, and maximizing voter participation by using existing community centers and public gathering places that voters tend to use anyway, and so could just, you know, hook voting onto a trip that they're already doing to go to the local rec center or whatever it is. So the bill, it's a fairly straightforward bill. I'm happy to answer any questions. It passed with significant support in the House, and I'd urge the committee to give it a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. Questions for Delegate Lutke on this bill, which essentially would increase from 1 to 2 the number of early voting centers in most jurisdictions, and have a formula going into the future. Questions? Senator Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Lutke, thank you so much for your leadership on this issue over a lot of years now. I think it has made voters have a lot more, you know, easy access to cast a ballot. Question. The considerations that were added, I think, are excellent, but there's no objective measurement. So they can say, yeah, we thought about it, but we decided not to put it over there. Any thoughts about objective measurement or oversight?
It's hard to define objective measurements for some of these things, but in terms of oversight, the bill also included, thank you for prompting me because I neglected to mention it, it included language that would also give the State Board of Elections a role in overseeing these, which has been an issue in some location decisions in some counties.
So as you know, the state board had to approve every map that was brought before it last year. And there were some that were easy peasy, compliant and made sense and they signed off right away. And there are some, and St. Mary's was an example. You know, Senator Ellis's beloved Charles County was a problem in some areas. Will this bill be able to address issues like that?
I'm hopeful that it will.
Ultimately, I'm sorry, but the state board ultimately kind of checked the box and did not effect.
Sure. I'm hopeful that it moves us in that direction. I mean, obviously, there's no such thing as a perfect system of decision making. But, to take an example from Montgomery County, as you know, we had a significant debate over whether the counties have an option, and they still would under this bill, to add an additional early voting site at their discretion. Which was a result of a bill we passed a couple years ago. In Montgomery County, there was significant community support for adding an early voting site at White Oak, which, for those of you less familiar with Montgomery County, is a historically disenfranchised community. It's majority minority. It's one of the communities that has a concentration of minority voters as a result of redlining. It goes that far back. And it's a community that doesn't have a lot of access to cars. Many of the residents there are naturalized continental African citizens who are new citizens and want to exercise their right to vote. The Montgomery County Board of Elections made what I consider to be a poor decision not to locate a site there, although later there ended up, as a result of the pandemic, being a site in that location. But the state board was essentially not able to overturn that decision of the local board, even though the executive and the council and the community all wanted a site there. I think this bill would create the opportunity for the state board to weigh in and say to a local board, look, this decision is not in the best interest of voters. So I think it will move us in the right direction.
One more follow-up question, Delegate Lukey. As you spoke, it occurred to me, what if they still chose a site that was far away from White Oak? Would this bill allow them enough time to appeal to the state board, to a court, to say, hey, we're the better fit?
Yeah, I think it would allow time for the community to talk to the state board. And in fact, in the White Oak case, the community and elected officials did go to the state board and ask them to overturn the decision. The state board essentially said, we can't, right? We don't have the power to do that. So I believe it would.
Thank you so much, Delegate Lukey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carrozza.
Oh, you're on mute still, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate. And I think this bill was added to our list, so I'm playing a little catch up, if you can bear with me.
No problem.
I'm going through this right now. Is this a may or a shall as far as adding voting centers?
So it's a shall. The way our current early voting center law works is that we mandate a certain number of senators based on a formula rooted in the number of sites. I said senators, I think, based on the number of registered voters in a county. And then on top of that, a county is able to add an additional site at their discretion if they so choose. So this would increase the number of mandated sites in some counties based on that formula. So for example, Wicomico County would need to authorize an additional early voting site by the 2022 election based on the number of registered voters they have in that county.
Okay, and so I am skimming Mako's testimony, which they opposed. Did you work with them at all to address their concerns?
I've chatted with Mr. Sanderson and Mr. Canale and other folks at Mako about it. I mean, I think their concern is less about this particular bill than about the general cost sharing on elections between the state and localities. I think they see the formula as to some extent unfair, and that may be something that my committee and your committee needs to think about long term. But I think that's where their opposition is rooted.
That's all I have for now.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, the bill is pretty straightforward. Thank you, Delegate Lutke, and the committee will be taking it up shortly. So
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, moving to the last bill of the day. Delegate Ebersol. Those that shall be last will soon be first. So,
well, we'll try to make it a good one, Mr. Chair, if we can.
There'll come a day, Delegate Ebersol, you'll be at the head of the line.
Doesn't matter. I was happy to watch the majority of this hearing today.
Some might say
be in the Senate so badly, just so very badly. I bring to you House Bill 776. One of the things that the legislature did a few years ago was made a move to prevent students in pre-K through second grade from being suspended from school. All the research shows that there's really virtually no advantage to suspending a student other than perhaps getting them out of the way briefly. To them and to the schooling system, it really is of no value. However, this brought together a rather large complaint from principals and directors of schools at those levels that they had very little help in dealing with students that perhaps they would have suspended before, but now did not or could not. And so there is something in Maryland called, and I want to get it exactly correct, the Infant and Early Child Mental Health Consultation Project, which we currently fund at about $2 million a year, which has experts, and there are some here with me that will answer more specific questions, to come to schools and help them, both train them to deal with students who perhaps have mental health problems or seem to have mental health problems, and helping them to manage them, and also in working with those students, perhaps if it's appropriate in those particular situations. Now we are expanding our pre-K to many more places. We're going to have a mixed delivery system soon, where some private carriers will be delivering pre-K to our students, and we'll have many more students in 3- and 4-year-old pre-K than we had before. The need will be greater. In addition, children also attend childcare, and a childcare that's having difficulty with the child can just expel them. Just say to the parents, we don't know how to handle your child. This cannot be good for the family or the child. And so this program is a program that's very necessary. We considered just asking to expand the program, to expand the amount of money in this time, but being judicious and careful with Maryland state money, we asked for the MSDE to do a study of about 9 factors, which you'll find in the bill, concerning the effectiveness of this program, with an eye toward, obviously, a favorable report by them by the end of this year, so that we could move next year to expand this program and make it available. It's pretty timely, as some of the expansion I talked about 3- and 4-year-old pre-K is only coming and not entirely here yet. And so with that, I will just ask you for a favorable report on this report. I know we don't love them, but in this case, we are looking for, we have a definite eye toward what we would like to do in the future. We just like to have some facts behind us. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Ebersol. Good to see you. Let's have Margo Candelaria, please. USN.
Oops, there we go. Hi. Hi, Senator Pinsky, Delegate Ebersol, and all of the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. I am a research assistant professor at the University of Maryland School of Social Work at the Institute for Innovation and Implementation. And I'm here today to give testimony in favor of this bill. I will try to keep it brief. You have my written testimony, I think, and some other documents. I will just say this, globally speaking, we have evidence at the national level that infant and early childhood mental health consultation has positive outcomes for children and for classrooms. It's really designed to support the adults who work with children in their early childhood settings, or even home or early intervention settings, to manage children who might be having behavioral challenges, or to set up classrooms to promote positive social supports. It's a lot of giving the adults the skills that they need to help these children stay in their childcare setting so that they are prepared to go to school. And we have evidence that it helps improve social emotional outcomes and teacher stress and classroom outcomes, as well as, when implemented well, reduce suspension and expulsion in preschool kids. Here at the University of Maryland, we have worked with the state MSDE since the very beginning of the consultation project, which started as a contract between the university, MSDE, and BHA, and has now expanded to serve statewide. So we provide ongoing implementation support to make sure things are up to best practice and standards, as well as conduct evaluations. In order to just keep this brief, I'll just highlight a few things. We have findings every year that kids' behavior, reported behavior, improves with consultation, and the classroom climate improves with consultation. However, we also know that it is severely underfunded. So we have 38 consultants that cover the entire state. To give you an example, in Baltimore City, there are 2 infant and early childhood mental health consultants for the entire city. There are almost 20,000 childcare slots in the city. So we clearly know that even though we know it works, we don't have the funds to really reach all of the kids that need. In addition, this study would help identify where are some of the other gaps in services, where are we doing well, what are we not doing well, and what do we need to improve the services. Sorry, one of my kids is getting home from school. We did just this last year help all of the programs improve their standards to make sure we are up to national standards. We improved, we're working to improve our equity and how we address equity statewide within consultation to make sure that is happening appropriately. And we're constantly working to make sure that all of the workforce has all the competencies that they need and are in line with best practice. So overall, I would say this is an effective program. It is under-resourced. We need more services to help families, and we could use more support in building the workforce. But I'm highly in favor of this bill.
Thank you very much, and hopefully your dog has calmed down. Let's go to Morgan Horvath, Abilities Network, followed by Allison Nelson.
Hello, thank you, Senator Pinsky and members of the committee. Thank you for having me. I'm Morgan Horvath. I am the director of Project ACT, which is the program of Abilities Network. ACT stands for All Children Together, and we provide the early childhood mental health consultation services for Baltimore County, Harford County, and Cecil County. So I have seen firsthand how this project supports families by preventing suspension and expulsion from these programs, as well as promoting social and behavioral readiness for kindergarten. We know that children who are not socially and behaviorally ready for kindergarten are more likely to be receiving special education services, which costs about $10,000 a year per child per year. That children who are not socially and behavioral ready for kindergarten are more likely to be retained in grade, which costs about $11,000 per year per child. And we know that children who are suspended or expelled, there's a cascade effect to that. So those children are more likely to have lower academic achievement long-term, more likely to drop out of school, more likely to be involved in delinquency, and more likely to be incarcerated. So Project ACT uses a highly effective multidisciplinary team model, including mental health professionals and special educators, to address the wide variety of needs faced by our communities. And I'm proud to say that over 90% of the children that we serve are successfully retained in their childcare programs. At least 20% of the children we serve are eligible for special education services. Yet neither the child nor the child care staff or the teachers in the program receive any support in that child care setting. So take Isabella, she's a 4-year-old in Baltimore County. She was unable to communicate her needs or participate in any classroom activities. Her teachers were really struggling with challenging behaviors, and they came to us to ask for help. We were the only program available to provide them with any support, because the school system would not even assess her for eligibility for special education services. We know our model is really effective, but we lack the capacity to meet the demand from our communities. During most typical years, we're unable to open any new cases in the fourth quarter of our grant year. So many of those children are placed on wait lists. Julius, Noah, Gabriel, Dylan, Liam, Zion, Paige, Brian, Caden, Blake, Trayvon, Bryson, Lima, Aubriella, Owen, Madeline, Daquan, Nicholas, Benjamin. These are just some of the toddlers and preschoolers who had already been removed or expelled from their childcare programs by the time we had a consultant available to come and work with their teachers. There are over 41,000 childcare spots across the 3 counties that we serve. And we're currently funded to support only 0.2% of that population, while the national data shows that likely 3 to 5% of the general population in this age group could utilize this level of service.
Ms. Horvath, you're going to have to wrap up.
Okay, that's my last sentence. A gap analysis of the needs of the community and availability of resources is not only important, it's essential for Maryland's children and families. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Allison Nelson, please. I think I saw her.
I'm here. Hello, thank you for having me here today. My name is Allison Nelson, and I am speaking in favor of House Bill 776. I'm actually speaking from my family's personal experience with the Infants and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Program. We're in Montgomery County, and we were involved when my son was 4. He's now 8. and he's in second grade. So I can't say enough good things about this program and its impact on my son, my family, his classmates, teachers, and the school. Briefly, it helped all of us, every single one of us involved. It was helpful too. Working with an early childhood mental health professional improved our outcome, largely because the hands-on approach it employs in the classroom, as well as addressing challenges before they get too big, as obviously our experts have spoken about before. Being able to collaborate closely with a specialist gave us tools we wouldn't have had to help with the rest of that school year and beyond. Obviously, we're a couple of years beyond that now. Continuing to fund this program and hopefully expanding it is a proactive way to benefit individuals as well as the overall community. And again, I'm speaking on my own personal behalf and my family's behalf. And I really cannot even tell you how much it has helped and impacted us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate Ebersol, for this bill. And a little background to my question, really quick, Mr. Chairman. A few years ago, 2-3 years ago, my district opened up a program for these little kids, elementary school, and called the Fresh Start Academy, where they are having some of the issues that you're talking about today, you and your witnesses. And their plan was to carry these children away from the school, the classroom they're in, and put them in a centralized location for this kind of attention. What's your view on your witnesses on a practice like that? Is that considered suspension, or is that in-school suspension, or it's not? And is that what's your view on that, please?
So I'll start off in a general sense, and then I'll let the experts weigh in afterwards. As a public school educator and a general educator for 35 years, I never think it's a good idea to create a specific environment for students who have specific problems. The concept of inclusion has been one that while at first as a general educator, we were all very concerned, has proved itself to be significant in terms of educational efficacy for students of all groups, not just the groups that are not the special education students, but also the students that are, but all groups benefit in those situations. So I'm a little stunned at what you're describing there.
I can jump in to say I was aware of that. That was in Southern Maryland, right?
Charles County, yes, ma'am.
So I was fortunate enough to be the evaluator of the Bridge project, which is an early childhood mental health system of care project in Southern Maryland at the time, which ended actually this past September of 2020. And that was not in line with the approach that we were taking, which was we never, as Delegate Ebersol said, really want to pull kids into specialized environments if they don't need it. And so this kind of program that we're describing goes into their environments that they're in and helps those providers gain skills and maybe change their environment or different practices to allow those children to stay successfully in their placements. So, I mean, when we're talking about early childhood, if you talk about a preschool to prison pipeline, that's what's happening, is that these kids get kicked out, then they get segregated and they're kept outside of the system as they move forward. We don't want to start that early on. We want to keep kids where they're meant to be, where they learn the best with their peers and in their regular classrooms. Obviously, if they need additional services, we want to pull in those services and surround them. But we also know that those services are not child directed when you're talking about a toddler or a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. There's no pulling a 2-year-old in the hallway and working with them and bringing them back to the classroom so that they behave perfectly. It's really about equipping the professionals who are working with the children to be able to maintain them safely in their classrooms and have a really robust learning environment for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, Senator Ellis. That's a good question.
Senator Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously the pandemic has been really tough on childcare providers, families, children themselves. I guess, can you speak a little bit to what the program has been able to do or to help during the pandemic, during the last year?
And I think I'll hand that off to the experts immediately.
Well, I will let Morgan say, because she is really running a program on the ground. I can say at the university level, what we do is provide a lot of support to Morgan's program and all the other programs in the state. And what we've done in this time period is to offer a lot of hands-on support to the consultants on how to pivot what they're doing in this environment. And that includes really allowing them to support the childcare providers and parents who are using childcare on managing the stress of this time. So many programs are offering support groups to childcare providers, one-on-one consultation on like, how do you manage like this new environment? How do you keep masks on kids? How do you manage the parent stress of like keeping social distance and all of the things? So there's lots of parent groups, there's lots of resource giving, there's lots of phone calls. I'll let Morgan describe it, but we have worked really hard to support them and supporting the childcare providers.
Yes, we've pivoted all of our services to be able to be delivered virtually, which, as you can imagine, is a bit of a challenge in a preschool classroom to be doing observations and to trying to work with teachers remotely when they're already extremely strapped for time. But what we have been finding is that we did a lot of what Dr. Candelaria mentioned, providing support groups to parents and providers. We have been providing training on trauma-informed practices, and especially how to respond to children in a trauma-informed way after a big event like COVID. And what we found is that while we usually have an extremely high demand for child-specific casework, right now we're having providers and teachers come to us saying, my whole classroom needs help. Every child in my program is struggling right now. So we have pivoted a lot of our work this year to doing trauma-informed classroom-wide cases, because every single child in the program really needs that higher level of social emotional support.
Got it. Thank you. So just to summarize, I think my understanding is that this is not really just a standard study. It's really to help provide some kind of a gap analysis to get you to the next level of what sounds like, even just from your prior description, a very successful program, and actually a much needed program in many ways, that it helps show how many additional resources, how much additional support and potentially additional funding is needed to actually scale this program up to the next level, right? So it's meaningful in that way.
Thank you, Senator. As you say, isn't that so? That's true. This is dealing with a program that already exists, of course, and it goes to capacity a good deal. That they are stretched thin, and there is need. And you could posit, because we say about everything with COVID, the need's even greater now than it would be, but it will continue to be large, even if we were to what we might call normal in the future. And I think there's plenty of room for an expansion of capacity, but as I say, rather than just jumping in the pool, we decided that we would let we'd get a report and see if indeed there was room for an expansion, and ask for some more funds to expand this program.
And it helps quantify that need too, right?
Correct. Thank you. That is so.
Delegate Ebersol, if I just could add, I think, and again, I think Ms. Horvath would agree, that we also have trouble finding and maintaining highly qualified staff because of our salary limitations at the given funding level. And so as we really try to hire providers who are specially trained in infant and early childhood education, special education, and mental health practices, they require the salaries that they deserve, right? And that are commensurate with their degrees and experience. And so that's part of our challenge as well. We did a survey last year for program directors, and they all said sometimes they have vacancies for 3 to 12 months before they can find someone new. So that's part of the challenge as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I could just add one thing, oh, no, never mind. I'm going to let you guys.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Ebersol. Thank you, witnesses, for your patience and your testimony. That concludes the hearing on this bill.
Senator Washington has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No
Senator
problem.
Washington, I apologize.
Well, it's okay. I just wanted to thank the delegate, my birthday twin, for
May 20.
for this bill. And then also, I was on Ways and Means when we passed that, and thank you for, I know we raised at the time, making sure that our educators and providers had the support that they needed to follow this good policy, which is to keep kids in school. and to close the sort of the on-ramp to the school to prison pipeline, but it only works if we make sure that the practitioners have what they need. Isn't that so, Delegate?
I think it is very so, and thank you, Senator.
Or you could say it was so-so, but.
So just so-so.
Okay, that completes the hearing on Delegate Ebersol's bill. Thank you for those testimony. Committee, two things. One, you should be receiving, if you haven't already, a list of about 20 to 23 bills on 3 voting lists. We will do that either soon after the floor tomorrow or after a short lunch break. We may add a couple of other bills. I may have left off a couple. And next week, we might try to actually have 2 voting sessions if we're able to finish at 3 o'clock on some of these days, so we can spread out the workload and still try to get us out of here by a reasonable time where we can see the sun. And Senator Simon Ayer, if you would come to the principal's office for us to have a conversation after we complete here, I'd love to have you down in my office. So that being said, we're adjourned. Thank you all for being engaged. And I really want to thank all of you for, being here for all the bills and paying attention.